right, well, we'll just quickly recap. We've called the meeting to order. We'll call it again, I'm the chair pro tem. It's 4:10 PM, the Energy Storage Systems Committee. So we're just doing a quick review and approval of minutes. There was a motion made by Michael to approve the minutes as circulated. Judy Markland seconded the motion. We're going to do a roll call vote, starting with Michael.
Yes.
Judy.
Yes.
George.
Yes.
Brandt is yes. So it's unanimous with three, or a couple of people absent. Paul and
Joyce has
Joyce
arrived.
are absent. Okay.
Hard to get out of the lab on time. So let me put on my video here. There we go.
All right. I yield the pro tem chairpersonship to Joyce.
Okay.
We've approved the minutes unanimously without you.
I would have, yes, and I can tell you I would have supported that. Okay, so we started a discussion of what Judy sent us to, I think, was it yesterday or was it this morning? Kind of the most up to date with a few little tweaks.
Can I, point of reference, do you want to discuss time frame first or the framework?
I think last time we tried discussing the framework first, or the time frame first, and it didn't work out that well. We didn't really have that much time to actually talk about what Judy had prepared. So I think we should probably at least spend some time on that, and maybe at the end of that we'll have a better idea of is this ready to just go to the planning board? Maybe then we could go for something this town meeting. I would say about the timeline, the main thing might not be, can the planning board look at this and do the hearings? The main thing might be, can we get feedback from council before town meeting? That might be, and at this point, town meeting is in April. So to me, that's kind of that's the part that's kind of unknown. And if we decide, hey, let's go for this town meeting, we have to be prepared for the possibility that we would have to withdraw it at the last minute because we haven't heard back from council. You know, that's to me, that's the thing with the time frame. So we either decide this is so important, we want to at least give it a try. But if we're going to give it a try, we got to be prepared for possibly having to withdraw at the last minute.
And
So
I do feel compelled to just stand up for the prerogative of the planning board that whatever happens here in this meeting doesn't mean that the other members of the planning board are just going to go along with this. There's a lot here.
Yeah.
I let the planning board know at our last meeting at the end of January to expect this in the end of February, and we had a preliminary conversation about it. And there's definitely, openness and concern.
Yeah.
And also, Joyce,
hmm.
the general bylaw goes to the select board.
Yes, I understand that. So but it doesn't make much sense to have the general bylaw without the zoning bylaw, right?
Well, I
Okay, well-
think they need to go together is the issue.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
even one of them could happen in a relatively
And
fast time frame.
well, the general bylaw will need a public hearing too.
I,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm
Yeah.
saying
No, I think the
Federal
time
bylaw
constraints,
can
all I'm
happen
saying is,
on a fairly fast time frame if the zoning bylaw can't. I'm agreeing with you that this would be together. George, go ahead.
Can we talk about the framework before we get off into the weeds anymore? How about timeline? And let's see where we are in the framework. And if there's great disagreement on that,
Yeah.
then this timeline discussion may be moot.
Correct.
So
That's why I
go
put the
with-
discussion first in the timeline
Yep.
section.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, do we want to start with the general bylaw or the zoning bylaw?
Judy, where does it make most sense to start?
I don't. I think that zoning bylaw has more decisions to be made
Well, let's start there then.
in terms of setbacks and maximum size and that kind of thing.
Okay. So looking at that, the first thing that comes up is the table where it says would not be allowed in residential 1, special permit in residential 2, commercial, industrial, and industrial. Um, is there any way to make this not allowed in the Aquifer Overlay District? Or is that
That's,
not
that's,
under
in-
the table
that's included in the text of the bylaw.
of the bylaw, not the zoning bylaw, the general bylaw?
The zoning bylaw is all the citing, all the things that relate to where it can go.
Okay, so
how
it's
big it
elsewhere
can
in
be.
the document.
So it's in the text of the zoning document.
Okay, thank you. So is there any discussion of the first part that's highlighted there, that I guess the table of use section?
So,
You want to share that,
ahead.
Joyce? No?
Oh, sure. Sharing is not turned on, so no, I can't share it. Not until I get permission.
While you're waiting, I should point out that
You have permission.
Okay,
the first 3 zoning districts all have residential units in them or allowed as a use, whereas the commercial, industrial, and industrial do not, which I think
will you
makes,
say that again, please?
that's the wrong one.
This is the zoning bylaw?
No, this is the
Oh,
general.
that's it. Oh, okay, all right, stop sharing.
The
There we go.
commercial, industrial, and industrial districts do not allow residential as a use.
Oh, okay,
And I think for the large batteries, that's helpful in presenting these to the
Yeah.
Attorney General's office, because it's certainly Medway also did not restricted theirs to an area that didn't allow residential. And I think it makes sense for the very large ones that they not be included in a district with residential.
okay. But the ag residential 2, it's allowed by special permit.
Those are for tier 1, the smaller units.
Okay, all right. So the next play, so there, I'm not hearing anybody jumping up and saying, oh, we should change that ag residential to no, and just have it as a special permit in commercial, industrial, and industrial. I'm not hearing that from anybody.
Well, let me just jump in and put one consideration out there for everyone to think of as we go through this. One of the things we know is that the state is trying to facilitate siting of these sorts of systems and is favoring developers who are challenging zoning and general bylaws as examples of unreasonable regulation or unreasonable restriction. And so I think as we craft this kind of bylaw, whether it's in this case a zoning bylaw or a general bylaw, that we're attuned to how we might be unreasonably regulating. And to make that specific, and I could share, I'm not, but if you were to look at our commercial, the land area in Whately that consists of either commercial industrial or industrial, I think you will see collectively those areas are very small and basically already taken up by land uses that are unlikely to ever change. And so we are at risk of creating a bylaw that gives us a false sense of security. We pat ourselves on the back with it's so reasonable that we have prevented these big systems from going in anywhere but commercial, industrial, or industrial. And we think that's logically where they belong. But a developer says, well, basically, you have now unreasonably regulated our ability to place these systems in your community by only allowing them in places that are infeasible. So that is my concern. If it were me, even in tier 2, I might at least add in AR2 setback from the road. And I might almost make tier 1 and tier 2 the same in the table. Special permit for everywhere but AR1 and prohibited in AR1, out of a concern that by limiting where these systems can go, we can be challenged in court and all of this hard work is wasted.
I'd like to comment on that.
Go
If
ahead.
you look at Sunderland's area, which was small to begin with, and then take a look of the composition of it, roughly half of their allowable district is owned by Mass Fish and Game and is set aside as conservation land. So what's available is tiny there.
And Judy,
We
you will
have,
note,
we have, I haven't finished.
Judy, you will
We-
note in the letter from the Attorney General's office, and I'm sorry to roll over you, but the Attorney General's office spoke to this very point, that the Attorney General's office is not saying in their approval of Sunderland zoning bylaw that everything is hunky-dory with the way they have limited where those systems can go. They have made it very clear that Sunderland's bylaw is still open to challenge for being an unreasonable regulation. So I don't think you can look at the Attorney General's approval of Sunderland as giving them a go-ahead. I think
I
they
didn't
still
say
are at
that.
risk.
Grant, and if you had let me finish, I was going to say that there are quite a few, the commercial industrial part of those districts is not developed, and there is open land there. And I don't think we should be designing, as a basic principle, I think designing a bylaw on the risk of being sued is not a good way to go. It's very expensive to sue when somebody is designing a layout and looking at costs and advantages. They're going to start with the zoning and what's there. And they're not going to approach it with the idea of, well, we think if we take this to court, we might, it takes years to get these things through land court. Also, I would not guarantee that this will go through town meeting as it is anyway. There's a lot of opposition to very large systems. And I think if you allow them in more than those two areas, the large systems will never go through. I have doubts about the small system, but I think we need to try.
Given the amount of money at stake, I just think you don't have an appreciation for how much a
If somebody
developer is
threatens to
going
sue,
to.
we can always say, go ahead and build it, which is what you're doing anyway. I don't see we have anything to lose.
Said, okay, I've made my point.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm not hearing anybody say that ag residential 2 for tier 1 ought to be a no.
Correct.
As there is a way to take the aquifer protection. So if a person, if they're not even a company, if a person owned land that was ag residential 2 and they decided they're not going to build a house on it or something, they could put a tier 1 system in a residential neighborhood. And ag residential 2 is really just ag residential. It's further away from the road and doesn't have as much frontage, and basically in many, many cases. So is having something like that in a residential neighborhood sufficient? I think we haven't gotten to the part where we talk about setbacks, but I think let's just keep that in mind as we're looking at setbacks. Because that's I mean, if there's a safety hazard, it's to people surrounding, right? Okay. The next place that Judy's marked for decisions are here, tier 1. Is between 50 kWh and 1 MWH and not exceeding 1 acre in size, inclusive of required setbacks and buffers. And I don't know whether those numbers are reasonable, but they come from Medway.
What's the logic for adding the sizing? What you've done, Judy, is you've picked the electrical capacity of the systems from Medway and the acreage from Sunderland and blended them together. And so what's the logic?
Well, Medway does not require a special permit. And their system is basically inclusive of very small systems. They don't have a minimum size.
So for tier
We're
1,
requiring a special permit. I think we want to eliminate the smaller units.
When you say eliminate the smaller units, mean they're not subject to the special permit.
Not subject to the special permit, correct?
So up to
Um,
50 kWh, that's a unit that's in somebody's home or garage. And those are not,
These are ground mounted. You start with the definition that it's ground mounted.
mhm.
So it's not in a home.
Oh, homes, I would think a home
Mm-hmm.
system is a ground mounted system.
No, it's,
My home is on the ground.
we discussed this last time. No, ground mounted means the battery's mounted on the ground, not on your wall or your cellar floor.
Okay.
that definition, where is that definition from? I mean, I'm with Joyce in thinking that
Well, that's the way we defined ground mounted solar systems.
so that might be a definition in the solar part of the
Right.
bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel that the word ground mounted applies to solar panels and battery. It doesn't really apply to batteries so much. Batteries are always going to be on the ground in some way. They're not going to be up on a pole above I mean, that's to me, that when you say ground mounted systems, I think of
grants are on this garage wall, aren't they?
It's in a cabinet in my basement.
but it could be on the floor.
Okay.
Doesn't
It
have to be
is.
all mounted.
It just
Yeah.
made that language, we may be getting lost in the weeds there, but I mean, I think the key idea is we're trying to define a tier 1 that is within a certain electrical capacity range and limit the size. And both of those are somewhat arbitrary numbers, but not without precedent based on what Medway has done. Like, I know that Medway spent a bunch of time and money with consultants to come up with their bylaw. And I don't believe they put size limits in their definitions. And I know that Sunderland did. And so I'm trying to understand, Judy, the traceability between the purpose of the bylaw to protect health, safety, and welfare of the town to these size limits.
Okay.
So what is it about 1 acre or 4 acres that is
Four
significant?
acres came specifically from Sunderland. And so we know that the AG would approve it. 1 acre was, no, Joyce, the 4 acres comes from Sunderland.
Well, sizes then come from Sunderland. Why did they choose those sizes?
And how does that
Sunderland
relate to
chose the
us?
size limit because that's the size limit they have for their solar bylaw.
Okay,
Okay, but
so
that
they
comment
parallel.
goes down below on the next line. With the 4 acre,
Yeah,
not with 1
I
acre.
will move it.
So we could talk about what's reasonable. I think you don't necessarily need a size limit if you have the, it might be as simple as just agreeing on a power limit and
Yeah,
not having a size limit for tier 1.
yeah. I mean, size might change with technology.
Indeed. In computing the, basically Moore's law said that the amount of, well, it was really a function of speed, but also became a function of size, that the amount of computing power that fit in a certain
Yeah, but
volume would, basically drop by half every 18 months.
but I don't know that energy density will scale that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but do we actually have any data on how these systems, I mean, this recent article just suggested that they've already got new systems that put much higher amounts of energy in a much smaller volume.
Yep, that's true. Then when they get to the energy density of jet fuel, I think they're gonna hit a hard limit there.
Well, you're saying that 4 acres over time might not be the limit we want, but I think the issue
it
is
might
whether
be.
it's,
I'm beginning to think that the acreage, the sizes are a red herring. And the whole driving force behind all of this was fear of fires and environmental contamination.
Yep.
the advantage of it. I agree with you, but the advantage of acreage is that we know that the AG has approved this. Whereas I don't know of any one that limits size that they have approved.
Oh, so the sizes that the note says the tier 1 and tier 2 structure comes from Medway was not tier 1 and tier 2 based on energy storage, kilowatts and megawatts. Is that what you're saying?
I wish I had looked back at Medway. The 1 megawatt comes from, the 1 megawatt is in Medway, and that's the upper limit for tier 1.
Oh, okay. But they
The
did not have
lower limit I put in because Medway does not require a special permit. And I assume that we would not want to require a special permit for very relatively small systems and should not. Which is why, and I guessed at a size. I have no.
Yeah.
It seemed big enough. I think in the memo I sent with it, it would be something like 5 or 6 battery of the standard kind of battery that's in residential units now, which seem to big enough complex together to justify having a special permit. I mean, if you think about the kind of battery storage you have in a home, this
Yeah.
would involve, say, several of them together. I think it was something
Yeah,
like
didn't
5
the
or
standard
6.
was 12 kWh, Grant, or 12.5 kWh?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and Erica just circulated this comment that she received information from Allison at FERCog, who spoke to the building inspector. Did people notice that comment from the building inspector?
Was that in an email today?
That was in Erica's email from Monday, so that would be
Her
yesterday,
reminder email.
3:13. So she
Oh.
says, the quote from Allison Gage at FERCog, as reported by Erica, is that I talked to the building inspector, and he said that residential/commercial batteries used for backup storage would go through a building permit rather than the zoning bylaw. The building code, this was new information to me, the building code has a section related to BESS, so any project would have to conform with what is in the code. So I take that to mean that there's some, and now I think somebody here has an obligation to look at this part of the building code. There's some category of battery energy storage systems that at least our building inspector doesn't see as subject to zoning bylaws.
Unless we put in, unless the town decides that there is some size limit above which we think there should be zoning control. The town always has the option to, where it wants to institute things like setbacks. So the issue is, at what size does that happen? Routinely, no, and that's why the building code has the standards. So I think we have to, what has to be decided is what that size is.
Yeah, there's some
And-
threshold. We cannot be less restrictive than the building code. But I don't know that we're always entitled to be more restrictive than the building code.
I think
I mean,
about a
go
good,
ahead, Jim.
if there are these, building, they have to conform to the building code. It'd be interesting to know what those are. Are they based on the same fire safety standards that we were talking about in earlier meetings? That'd be really good to know. So I agree, that's something that somebody should take as their homework to look
The
into that.
fact,
Mm.
I agree with you, Joyce, but the fact that these other towns have battery systems means that you can certainly do things that the building code doesn't allow.
Agreed, and then that comment as relayed specifically addresses residential/commercial backup systems rather than standalone battery energy storage systems. So we need to find out what the distinction is there, because those are two distinctly different classes. So again, we need to look at the building code and probably get back to the building inspector and clarify that.
I think we're deciding we're not ready to go. It's good to generate a list of questions.
Um,
So
same
there's, I think, definitely more thinking around the tiers and the thresholds. And yeah, and I've just been advocating for like traceability. I hear your point, Judy, that, well, it passed in Sunderland. I was going to remember you often telling me when you were on the planning board with me that just because it worked in another town doesn't mean it was right or good.
No, but I
But,
think it created in this case, what you have is a logic that the AG was comfortable with. it seemed to them a reasonable size.
Yeah.
And if it seems to, then the issue is whether that's a reasonable size for us, and that's why I started there.
Okay. The 1 acre, where did that come from? If it did not come from Sunderland?
I looked at the aggregate, the top limit, and thought that you ought to be able to place a 1 megawatt
Okay, so that's an
system in 1 acre, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have. I made it up, Joyce.
okay. You
It seemed
estimated,
logical.
you estimated it. Estimate based on the upper limit of what was it, 50 kWh.
Well, I think actually 1 megawatt,
1 megawatt,
You-
1 megawatt
You felt
hour.
like a
Sorry,
megawatt would fit comfortably in an acre and not more than a megawatt in an acre, based on what we know about present technology.
Mhm.
And again, there should be a reasonable intuition that there's, like, when we create these tiers, that they're different, risks and concerns based on scale. They're sort of below a certain threshold. We don't really have concerns. We don't have to do a lot of regulation.
Yep.
So there's whatever people are putting in their homes and their businesses, we generally don't have to worry about it. It's backup storage. And then there's something where it's standalone, connected to the grid, and there's got to be some logic that says, up to a certain scale, well, there are concerns, but they're of a more manageable nature, and less restriction is needed, or they can be in more places in the town. So I get this idea that, well, maybe an acre here, an acre there, that can sort of fit in various places, like an AR2 or in the commercial district. But once you get into big systems that might have a lot of impact on the community, on resources. So I do sort of see the logic. I'm still struggling between either just liking the acreage limits or but I'm struggling with how to set matching the right power limits to the right land use limits.
yeah. And I guess while you were talking, one other question that came to mind was, it may not exceed 1 acre in size. That doesn't mean the lot. That means setbacks and the structure have to fit within 1 acre, and where that is on the property, if you had a lot that was 5 acres and you're only using 1 acre of it, that one, you can't spread it out over 5 acres. So I guess coming to
Right.
to me, I was starting to wonder what does that 1 acre mean then?
Well, as I said, you may not need that. Maybe the size limit is enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my intuition at this point is that generally speaking, energy storage capacity increases with size, and that up to a certain point, certain size of these systems poses less risk of all the things we've talked about: thermal runaway, needing a lot of, or just being very complicated to manage.
Like for example, maybe it would actually be safer if they were more spread out. If you're going to do 1 megawatt hour, uh, 1 megawatt hour, maybe it would be safer
Yeah, probably would.
was in 5 separate little buildings of 200 kilowatt hours that had some space between them. So I'm
Can we really get into that level of specifying design?
No, no, but I'm just wondering if our bylaw says you have to fit that all into 1 acre. And you've got a 2 acre lot anyway, and for safety's reasons, it might be better to separate that into several smaller structures, maybe. But our bylaw is saying, no, you have to put those all into 1 acre. I'm questioning it because I think safety is our main concern. And it occurs to me that, 1 MWh within a smaller size and 50 kWh within that same size, those are, there's a like 200 difference, right? Factor
Mhm.
200 difference in the energy density. Um, maybe that, I don't, I'm questioning
Mhm.
the 1 acre, I guess. And I know Judy was estimating that
Well,
based on
as I
what,
say, I don't feel strongly about that it needs to be there.
yeah. Yeah,
Well, we may want to, I don't know how much more we can achieve on the
Yeah.
question of tiering, but I think looking back at Medway's approach, um, I just wish I had a better feeling for what the right thresholds are for what the different levels of concern are at different energy storage capacity. Um, yeah, thresholds.
yeah, yeah. Well, at some point it is, okay. Can you, if all of that energy were discharged in a short period of time, like how much energy is that compared to a stick of dynamite?
Mhm.
That might be a way to reasonably approach that. So but I mean, I don't happen to know off the top of my head what uh 1 MWh might be in terms of sticks of dynamite going off, right? So, okay, well, let's keep looking until we get to about 5 o'clock, and then let's talk about timeline. So we've got some things where we still have some questions.
Bill has to leave at 5 and you,
It's not somebody has to leave at 5. I have to have the meeting done by roughly 5:15. So,
okay, Michael has to leave at 5.
okay. Um, so so these things were from Medway and Shutesbury. I'm just looking for decision things that Judy, I think you put in yellow. There we go. Oh, setbacks. And this is siting and dimensional requirements. Is this under tier 1 or tier 2 already?
It
I
applies.
don't think it's related to tiers. In part E,
Oh,
citing
so
dimension.
tiers, the two different tiers don't have different setbacks? Okay, sorry, I misunderstood that from earlier.
Well, right now, again, that gets to the question of, is there a rationale for saying that setbacks for tier 1 should be different from tier 2? And I don't
Yeah,
have
I
a
don't
clue.
know. Do we have different setbacks for different size solar facilities?
No.
No,
Then maybe they shouldn't be different. Okay, and what are the setbacks from property lines for the solar facilities right now? Says 500 feet from the AR lot line. 75 feet is what Sunderland does, doesn't mention service roads. Medway is 100 feet, including a 15-foot buffer.
I think our 500 feet is probably excessive because we didn't focus on the amount of acreage that that would take, but
Yeah.
my recommendation would be 100 feet.
Yeah, I think I think it is important, again, from that perspective of unreasonable regulation, that, if you look around at enough different places and you're kind of in the ballpark, then you're good. And I think the 100 feet from Medway is,
To put it in perspective, a typical business would be 50 feet. And well, a light industry or
Mhm.
industrial marijuana is 50 feet in most circumstances. And those aren't necessarily ones that involve the kind of safety thing we're talking about.
Yeah, 100 seems reasonable. Certainly, in wetlands protection, there's a 100-foot buffer zone from wetlands, bordering vegetated wetland vegetation, and 200 feet from riverfront. So,
that's good to know too. Wherever there's precedent for numbers, where there's been some analysis and coming up with a reasonable distance. Like, I think the 750 feet from a water supply well is a good choice and well documented.
mhm.
Just a random thought on point 4, the 7 feet. I mean, I like it, but does that create any risks? That are we forcing them to be so far away from a source of water that they'd be hamstrung if they had to use or draw on water for firefighting? Or are we expecting they'll bring in all their water in tanker trucks if they need to? That might be a question for the fire chief. How far do they need to be from a hydrant to
I
fight a
don't think
fire?
from most private wells would be a legitimate source.
Right, correct.
So you're talking the town's water supply.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
allowed in the aquifer overlay district.
Right.
That's a moot point.
So if these systems are situated away from the town's water supply, like, up in the West Whately, then the only way, if there's a fire, and this is true for fires in general, like, I guess if there's a fire at a residence, firefighters can draw on water from the residence's private well.
Well, it'd be a little
Say no to
hard in
that.
most cases because
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
you
probably
don't
true.
just tie your hose
Right.
to it.
That's right. Right. So they
Right.
have to bring all their own water supply. So
That's,
Why
yeah,
we
I
have
mean,
to thank-
essentially there is no water in,
right.
or unless there's a brook or,
And there are some hydrants coming from the Northampton Reservoir down along Weber Road and onto Haydenville Road.
Hmm.
where there's public water, there's
Well,
hydrants.
then they're hydrants for emergency use.
Yeah. I think they're not, those hydrants that George is talking about, I do not think they're connected to Whately's water supply.
No. They're
Connected
coming from
directly
the
to-
Northampton reservoirs.
From the reservoir, yeah.
Yeah.
For firefighting purposes only.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the phrase, it's the qualifier there, water supply well is the important one. If it's drinking water that somebody's dependent on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially given, I don't know if anyone saw the New York Times article yesterday on the aftermath of the big fire there and the what's being found in heavy metals and testing for 5 miles around at minimum in the soil.
Hmm.
Um,
And we do have a citation for that one, so that's quite defensible.
Yeah. Great.
Sort
So
about part 5, the 10 feet, the 10-foot rule between BESS components. Was that from Medway?
Yes,
Okay. So that's about reducing risk of one container causing a problem for an adjacent one.
Mhm.
Part 6 is interesting. That would be, I mean, I'd love to get the fire chief's input onto what that's
exactly
all
what I
about.
put there. That's a question for the fire chief, perhaps. Um,
Okay, we've got about 4 more minutes.
okay,
So
let's go down and see as far as I'm looking now for the
for the yellow.
yellow.
Yep.
Oh, so we're done with the yellow thing. Um, noise from the solar bylaw. Fencing. Other bylaws require the fence to be chain link, should we as well? I think that's a question maybe for the fire chief. I mean,
yeah, you don't want a wooden fence, I don't think.
yeah,
So
And
how
you
does
want
that
one that,
interact?
I think you need one that vents. Must not inhibit required airflow.
yeah.
So how does
Right.
fencing interact with screening?
Oh, that's the screening from up here. Fully
Yeah.
from view by a boat.
So on the one hand, there's like the solar facility on Christian Lane is screened with a combination of wood fencing where it matters and some landscape. Um, but are we asking for double fencing, or can the required fencing in part 11 be, satisfy the requirement for screening?
I think you can screen without a fence.
With only landscape.
Yeah,
It's never been successful, Judy, that I can see around here.
well, I don't think, I mean, the safety requirements require a
Yeah,
fence that,
fencing seems reasonable.
I mean, I think it might be fair to say that a fence could be part of your screening, but if the fence is required to be chain link so that it doesn't block airflow, then it will be less of a part of your screening than it would be if a wood fence were available.
Mhm.
Yeah.
okay.
All right, should we switch to the other one or we're close enough to 5 that I think we could, um, I think gosh, timeline is the thing. Let me hit the stop share there.
Well, let's,
I'm gonna sign off and jump to that other meeting I need to be at. All right, so
Okay.
I'll wait to hear about the timeline. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Michael.
You bet.
Okay, there we go. So, time frame. We've got nominally 15 minutes for that. Um, boy, it seems to me like we're not gonna have our poop in a group for April town meeting.
given the pace at which we're moving today, no.
Yep.
It,
Um, it's certainly, if we were to finish things by June, there's always a special town meeting in June. We don't like to do it at special town meetings if it's a big zoning change, but that's if we feel like the risk is high enough that we really want to, then it may be that the burden is on us to advertise it really well, uh, and we'd have to convince people that that's a good idea. Um, so,
Makes sense.
well, so let me propose that we, um, I, it's really hard for me to get out of lab right at 4 o'clock. So, this worked, I guess, okay today because you put up with me being like 9 or 10 minutes late. Um, but if we're gonna stick with this time, if it's gonna stick with Tuesdays, then it might have to be 4:15. And I think if we're gonna need more time anyway, do we want to continue on a every 2 weeks
Mhm.
basis, or do we want to give ourselves a little bit of a break and maybe go to 3 or 4 weeks between meetings?
I do have to ask, is this the right way to go about what we're trying to do here? Um,
When you
I mean,
say
as
that,
you can tell, there's a lot of complexity. Like, I know Judy's the one who's written like all of Whately zoning bylaws over the years, and so, but it's still this, bylaws like this have a lot of moving parts and pieces and raise a lot of questions.
yeah,
And I just wonder if, do, it would be one thing if we were basically more or less taking a tried and true bylaw where consultants had been involved, like in Medway, and just basically importing it with a few minor tweaks, just to, then you can basically say, it worked over there, it passed muster, they did their due diligence. We can basically trust, even if we don't understand everything in here, we can basically trust, or we can read up on what they did. But once we start taking something and customizing it a lot, and I'm still, I apologize, Judy, it would be really helpful, or it's hard for me to just look at this and without exactly knowing how much is just directly copied from Medway, how much is new. But so the reason I'm asking this question, do we need to go through a process of hiring a, a professional engineer to advise us, or are we going to try to do this as a bunch of citizens who are, you know, on top of everything else we're responsible for on a day-to-day basis, doing our best to try to understand this technology and craft this kind of defensive bylaw around it?
What
I
I
just
think,
know my questions have multiplied the more that I start to see a lot of changes from something that's kind of a precedent.
well, I've tried to mark where the sources for things. So I think that
yeah,
should be fairly evident. Um, what I would suggest might make sense at this point is to send the draft to the fire chief and also to ask Allison if the people at FERCog had any reaction, because she's had it for 2 weeks now, and I kind of thought maybe we would get comments or thoughts from her, but we didn't. And maybe that's because we didn't ask for them. And with that under our belt, we would have a better sense of where to go. And maybe Erica, and maybe also Allison could advise on an engineer that might provide some input. I don't know whether Chris Kellogg, who works for Eversource, he was very helpful in working on the solar bylaw. He might have some input as well. He
mhm.
certainly knows a lot of the technicalities. So with your permission, I could run it by him.
It can't hurt to get more information. And
Um,
Now, just to recap and make sure I understand several things that have happened. One, we did get opinion from town council that says, yes, we are vulnerable. Correct?
Yeah, in so many words. Yeah.
Okay, second, we have seen that Buckland has a system coming in right now. Design's been presented, correct?
Yes.
I think there's an article in the Recorder about that. Yeah.
Yep, and I know Judy has looked at that. I sent out an article about the Wellesley municipal system that was just turned on in November. Quite a fairly large system, battery backup. They have other financial reasons for doing it, given they're a municipal electric and they can offset costs and
Yeah.
generate significant savings. I did see that Citizens was involved in that project. Citizens knows we're here. They were involved with the solar farm behind the transfer station.
Yep. The very first solar pilot.
Very first one, yep, yep.
was
So
Citizens.
we're on the radar there.
Well,
Uh,
I
I'm just,
being on the whole state is on their radar. But yes, they have dealt
yes,
with
but talking about specific places where we know they have done projects previously.
right. But yeah, I
Well-
don't think because they did a project with us almost 20 years ago that means that we're sort of in the crosshairs.
Well, they're
They were
active.
actually very easy to deal with. They were
Mm.
pleasant. They were very accommodating. They did everything we asked them to do.
Well, we went through a lot of Conservation Commission sidewalks and meetings with them, and then the accommodations were hard won because there are wetlands bordering it. So, but they did work with us finally, but it took it was not an easy process.
Okay. Yeah, when they were working with us on the pilot, it was very easy
Yep.
to work with them.
So I guess as I read more too about California and so on, I'm feeling urgency around this, but
Yeah.
I don't want to do a sloppy or poor job, but I don't want
Right.
to see it stretch out for 18 months.
Right. Well, who is
And
willing?
and I do see the necessity for having these systems. I'm not an opponent of them. I just think we need to be careful in how we situate these.
Right. Um, would well, it's I feel like there were two things that kind of came up. One is, hey, could we run these by the fire chief? And get his comments on those sort of decision points that are already labeled, and maybe, let him have the commented version so he sees where things are coming from. And mostly his concern will be safety. Um, and then maybe your water question, Brant, maybe, I don't know that anybody's requiring it, but maybe there ought to be on-site water storage in case of fire. Maybe, I,
Yeah.
I don't know that that's in anybody's bylaws. I don't know if bylaws is the place you can put that in, but um, to me, the other thing that kind of came up was uh, the building code for backup batteries, which is kind of what people have in their homes, has to comply with the code. Okay, and what are other things that standalone systems, as opposed to backups, do they also have to comply with the code? And what is the code?
I think you'll find that that's the requirement to comply with the code is in the bylaw.
Okay, but would be really nice to know, what does the code require that we don't have to require? All right, so for example, if the building code refers to these fire standards that we read about earlier on, then maybe that's something we need to know going into this. And I know that between now and our next meeting, whenever it is, if it's in the next 4 weeks, I will not have time to take that forward to anybody and make any progress. So I feel like there's those two things that are sort of a task that we hopefully can get someone to do. I don't know if we can make Erica do either of those.
I don't think
Oh,
we can make Erica do things.
we could ask nicely. I mean, I guess I'm not that as familiar with it. Like if I were a builder, I would know more about the building code to begin with. And I don't know who on our committee does have more familiarity with the building code. They would definitely have the vocabulary already to be able to do, to ask some intelligent questions there. So, who do you think is a good candidate for that?
I don't know anyone on the committee, on the planning board. JD Ross is a builder and knows the building code well.
It's just,
So,
if you want the wording, I'm sure it's online someplace.
Right. I'm not going to have enough time
right.
between all the
I-
other things I'm committed to do that.
I can look at building code. It is online. I recently had a backup generator installed here. I went looking for anything in building code about that, and everything I found was a reference back to NFPA, which we've already referenced in what Judy has developed. There's a lot of circularity too, where NFPA will reference back to building codes and the ICC, but I can look into that.
Okay. All right. So George will look into like what kind of protections are already in there for us in the building code. And who is gonna uh run this by the fire chief? I know in the past Brandt has done those had met with the fire chief and so on, but that would not necessarily mean that Brandt has to do this as well.
I could do that.
Okay. All righty. All right, so we'll have at least those two things fleshed out a little bit more. Good. So next meeting time and meeting frequency going forward.
Do we want to have someone follow up with FERCog to
Oh,
ask
oh,
for,
yes,
um,
absolutely.
that's something I can do, but I think we should give them the newer draft because it sounds like they have something that was old.
Yes, I would agree that the one Judy sent out, I think it was this morning or maybe it was yesterday. It would be the
Judy,
late.
are you gonna make changes based on this conversation that should be incorporated first or send out what we have today?
Send out what you have.
Yeah, I think the only thing we all consensed on was the 100-foot. As making
Yeah, you
sense.
could put
We could put the
make that
100-foot in. Um,
Okay,
oh, okay, then next meeting and meeting frequency hereafter. Oh,
So did you want to try again in 2 weeks on Tuesday, the 25th and do it at 4:15? Or again, it keeps seeming like Tuesday afternoons is not working somehow. So should we?
Well, it works for a lot of people. It's harder for me because I teach right until 4 o'clock, and you know what students do. They have a question, you end up staying there. And so it really 4:10 is a little more reasonable. And
Mhm.
so if a meeting were to start at
We
4:15,
did
I would make it.
Tuesdays on weeks that wasn't a select board meeting.
Then there's finance committee until
okay. It's budget season.
mid-April. Yeah, it's budget season. Um, so that's where that is. Could does anybody feel like they need more than 2 weeks to get their homework done?
Nope, 2 weeks is good for me.
Okay, then let's do 2 weeks. Okay. Let's do the 25th at 4:15.
Erica, can you tell Paul and Michael?
yep. I'll send out an email with the,
Okay. All right. Are there any items not anticipated? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move it.
Second,
All those in favor, Judy,
Right.
Brent,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Joyce, aye.
All right.
Great. Good night,
Right.
everybody. Thanks for all your hard work.